In every life, there are paths not taken, connections severed by circumstance or choice, and pieces of our hearts that we carry in absence, wondering about the people we lost or never got to know. There are children who grow up with questions about where they came from, parents who live with the weight of children they couldn't keep, and moments when the universe conspires to bring together what was torn apart by time, distance, and impossible decisions made in desperate situations. This is the story of how two strangers standing on opposite sides of a game show stage discovered they were father and daughter separated by 30 years of life lived in parallel. How one question and one answer revealed a connection neither knew existed, and how Steve Harvey witnessed the most emotionally powerful reunion of his entire career. A moment so profound that he broke down in tears, along with everyone else who understood they were watching something sacred unfold. Before we dive into this incredible true story that will restore your faith in destiny, healing, and the unbreakable bonds between parents and children, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because what you're about to hear proves that some connections transcend time, that love can survive decades of separation, and that sometimes the family we're searching for has been searching for us just as desperately. The two families walked onto the Family Feud stage in June 2025, randomly selected from thousands of applicants, brought together by pure chance, having no idea that their lives were about to intersect in the most extraordinary way. On one side stood the Bennett family from Portland, Oregon, led by 53-year-old Michael Bennett, a high school history teacher with kind eyes, salt and pepper hair, and a gentle demeanor that immediately put people at ease. He was accompanied by his wife Susan, his teenage son from that marriage, his sister Rachel, and his best friend Tom. During the pre-show interview, Michael talked about his life as an educator, his passion for teaching young people about the past, and his close family. But there was something in his eyes when he talked about family, a shadow of old pain, a weight he carried that he didn't mention in casual conversation. What the production team didn't know, what Michael rarely spoke about even with close friends, was that 30 years ago, when he was 23 years old and barely an adult himself, he had gotten his college girlfriend pregnant. They had been in love, or what felt like love at that age, but they were both from difficult family situations with no support system and no resources. When his girlfriend discovered she was pregnant, they'd struggled with the decision for months, terrified and overwhelmed, both still in school, neither with jobs or stability or any ability to provide for a child. After agonizing deliberation, they'd made the devastating decision to place the baby for adoption, believing it was the only way to give their child a chance at a good life when they had nothing to offer. The baby, a girl they'd held for just a few hours after birth, was adopted through a closed adoption in 1995. Michael and his girlfriend, whose name was Laura, had signed papers agreeing not to seek contact, had been told the baby was going to a good family who desperately wanted a child, and had tried to move on with their lives. But you don't move on from something like that, not really. Michael and Laura had broken up 6 months after the adoption, the trauma of what they'd experienced too heavy for their young relationship to survive. Laura had moved across the country, and Michael had lost contact with her entirely. He'd eventually married Susan, had another child, built a good life as a teacher, but not a day had gone by in 30 years that he didn't think about the daughter he'd given up. He wondered if she was happy, if her adoptive parents were good to her, if she ever thought about him, if she hated him for giving her away. He'd registered with adoption reunion registries years ago, hoping that someday she might search for him, but he'd never gotten any matches or contact. He carried a photo in his wallet, one of the few pictures taken in the hospital before the adoption, of him holding a tiny baby girl with wispy dark hair and his same nose, a photo he looked at often but showed to no one. On the other side of the Family Feud stage stood the Peterson family from Denver, Colorado, led by 30-year-old Amanda Peterson, a vibrant emergency room nurse with dark, curly hair, warm brown eyes, and that same distinctive nose that Michael carried. She was joined by her adoptive mother, Corinne, who had raised Amanda as a single parent after her husband died when Amanda was 5, her best friend Jenna, her cousin Lisa, and her coworker Marcus. During her pre-show interview, Amanda talked about her work as an ER nurse, about the adrenaline and purpose she found in emergency medicine, about her close relationship with her mom, Corinne, and about how grateful she was to have been adopted into such a loving family. But she also mentioned, almost casually, that she'd always been curious about her biological parents, had done ancestry DNA tests hoping to find biological relatives, and had spent years searching adoption registries with no success. "I had a wonderful childhood," Amanda explained to the interviewer. "My mom gave me everything, all the love and support anyone could ask for, but there's always been this piece missing, you know. Questions about where I got certain traits, why I'm drawn to certain things, what my biological parents were like. Not because I'm unhappy or because my mom wasn't enough, but just because it's human nature to want to understand where you come from." Karen, sitting beside her, nodded with understanding. "I've always encouraged Amanda to search for her biological family. I've never felt threatened by it because I know I'm her mom in all the ways that matter, and knowing her birth parents wouldn't change that. I want her to have those answers if she can find them." The game started with typical Family Feud energy, Steve Harvey working his magic to create fun and competition between the two families. Neither the Bennetts nor the Petersons had any idea they were connected. No reason to think this was anything other than a normal game show experience. The first few rounds went smoothly, both families engaged in giving good answers. But in the third round, during a question about family, something began to shift in ways no one could have anticipated. Steve asked the question, "Name something you might have inherited from your parents." It was a straightforward question designed to get answers about physical traits, personality characteristics, or talents passed down through families. Amanda was at the podium, and she buzzed in with her answer. "A distinctive nose," she said with a laugh, pointing to her own nose. "Everyone always comments on my nose, and I always wondered if it came from my biological mom or dad since my adoptive mom's nose is completely different." The answer was on the board, number 6 with 9 points, and the Peterson family celebrated. But something about Amanda's comment about her gesture toward her nose made Michael Bennett freeze. He stood with his family on the other side of the stage, and he found himself staring at Amanda Peterson, really looking at her for the first time. The nose she just pointed to, the distinctive shape she just mentioned, it was his nose. Exactly his nose. The same slightly crooked bridge, the same particular angle, the same unique characteristic that ran in his family. His heart started pounding, his hands beginning to shake. He told himself he was being crazy, that lots of people had similar noses, that this was just coincidence. But he couldn't stop staring, and the more he looked at Amanda, the more he saw himself in her features. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, all of it felt achingly familiar. Susan, his wife, noticed his distraction and leaned over to whisper, "Michael, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Michael couldn't answer, couldn't articulate the impossible thought forming in his mind. The game continued for another round, but Michael was barely present, his attention completely focused on Amanda Peterson, his mind racing with calculations. She was 30 years old, the exact age his daughter would be. She'd mentioned being adopted, mentioned searching for biological parents, mentioned that distinctive nose. She was from Denver, and he vaguely remembered the adoption agency mentioning Colorado as a possible placement location. The pieces were falling into place in a way that felt both impossible and inevitable. During a break between rounds, Michael did something that would change everything. He approached one of the producers, his voice shaking, and asked if there was any way to find out when Amanda Peterson was born and whether she'd been adopted. The producer, confused but seeing Michael's obvious distress, said they couldn't share that information but asked why he was asking. Michael, his emotions overwhelming him, explained that 30 years ago he'd placed a baby girl for adoption, that Amanda was the right age, that she looked like him, that he knew it sounded insane, but he had an overwhelming feeling that she might be his biological daughter. The producer, recognizing the potential significance of this, consulted with the show's executives and made the decision to pause the taping. They approached Amanda and her family privately, explained the situation, and asked if Amanda would be willing to share her birth date and some details about her adoption. Amanda, confused and overwhelmed, confirmed that she'd been born on March 22, 1995, in Portland, Oregon, and had been adopted through a closed adoption when she was just a few days old. The production team checked with Michael, who confirmed that those details matched his daughter exactly. The baby he'd given up had been born on March 22, 1995, in Portland, and had been placed through a closed adoption. The mathematical probability of this being coincidence was essentially zero. The show's producers, recognizing they were in the middle of something extraordinary, brought both families together in a private room off stage and explained the situation. Amanda and Michael stood facing each other, both crying, both terrified, both hoping desperately that this impossible coincidence was actually reality. Steve Harvey, informed of what was happening, came to the room himself, his own emotions visible as he tried to process this unprecedented situation. "We need to verify this before we proceed," Steve said gently. "The last thing we want is to create false hope or put you both through emotional trauma if this isn't real. We can arrange for rapid DNA testing if you're both willing." Both Amanda and Michael agreed immediately, desperate to know the truth. The show arranged for a genetic testing company to send someone to the studio with rapid DNA testing equipment. The test would take several hours to process, so both families were given private spaces to wait, though Amanda and Michael couldn't stop looking at each other, both seeing the similarities now that they knew to look for them, both feeling a pull toward each other that defied logic. During the wait, Steve sat with each of them separately. With Michael, he asked about the adoption and the 30 years since. Michael, tears streaming down his face, explained the whole story. "I was 23 years old, barely more than a kid myself. Laura and I were terrified. We had no money, no support, no way to raise a child. We thought adoption was the loving choice, giving our baby to a family who could give her everything we couldn't. But signing those papers, walking away from that hospital without her, it destroyed something in me. I've never forgiven myself for giving her up, even though I tried to tell myself it was the right decision." He continued, his voice breaking. "I've thought about her every single day for 30 years. Every birthday, I'd imagine what she looked like at that age, what she was doing if she was happy. Every Father's Day, I'd grieve for the relationship I'd never have. I registered with reunion registries. I did DNA tests. I prayed that someday she'd look for me and I'd get a chance to explain, to apologize, to tell her that giving her up was the hardest thing I've ever done and that I've loved her every day even though I didn't have the right to." Steve, visibly moved, asked, "What if the DNA test confirms that Amanda is your daughter? What do you want to say to her?" Michael thought for a moment, composing his thoughts. "I want to tell her I'm sorry. Sorry for not being strong enough to keep her. Sorry for missing her entire life. Sorry if she ever felt abandoned or wondered if I loved her. I want her to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about her, that I've carried her photo in my wallet for 30 years, that she's been part of my heart even though she wasn't part of my life. And I want to know about her, who she became, what her life has been like if she's happy." With Amanda, Steve asked what she was feeling and what she hoped for. Amanda, also crying, explained her side of the story. "I've had a wonderful life. My mom, Karen, is incredible. She gave me everything, and I've never felt like something was missing in terms of love or family. But I've always had questions about my biological parents, always felt this empty space where knowledge should be. I'd imagine what they looked like, why they chose adoption if they ever thought about me." She continued, "I've searched for years, tried every registry and DNA database, hoping to find any biological relatives. I made peace with the possibility that I might never find them, that maybe they didn't want to be found or couldn't be found. But I never stopped hoping. And now, the possibility that my biological father has been standing 15 feet away from me, that we were brought together completely by chance on a game show of all places, it feels like fate or destiny or something beyond explanation." Steve asked what she wanted from Michael if the test confirmed their relationship. "I don't know," Amanda admitted. "I don't have expectations of a father-daughter relationship because I'm 30 years old and he's a stranger. But I want to know him, to understand where I came from, to hear his story and to share mine. I want him to know that I don't hate him, that I understand adoption is complicated, that whatever his reasons were, I believe he thought he was doing what was best. And I want to know if there are medical issues I should be aware of, if I have siblings, if there's a whole biological family I've never known about." After 3 agonizing hours, the genetic testing professional returned with results. The show gathered both families, along with Steve and key production staff, in a private room for the reveal. The tension was palpable, everyone holding their breath, Amanda and Michael holding hands despite being strangers, both needing that connection in the moment. The genetic counselor spoke with professional compassion. "I've reviewed the DNA test results, and I can confirm with 99.99% certainty that Michael Bennett is Amanda Peterson's biological father. You are father and daughter." The room erupted in emotion. Amanda collapsed into Michael's arms, both of them sobbing uncontrollably. Karen, Amanda's adoptive mother, was crying tears of joy for her daughter finally getting the answers she'd sought for so long. Susan, Michael's wife, was crying as she watched her husband finally meet the daughter he'd mourned for 3 decades. The families surrounded them, everyone crying, everyone recognizing they were witnessing something sacred. Steve Harvey, standing to the side, had tears streaming down his face, not even trying to maintain his usual composure. In all his years of television, through countless emotional moments, he'd never seen anything like this. the raw power of a father and daughter finding each other after 30 years of wondering and searching and hoping. After several minutes of tears and embraces, Steve gathered everyone to sit down, recognizing that this moment needed to be honored properly. He spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been doing television for over 30 years. I've seen reunions, I've seen surprises, I've seen emotional moments. But I have never seen anything like this. The statistical impossibility of you two being randomly selected to compete against each other on Family Feud, out of thousands of applicants from across the country, that's beyond coincidence. That's divine intervention." He continued, "Michael, you've been carrying this pain and this love for 30 years, wondering about your daughter, hoping she was okay. Amanda, you've been searching for your biological parents, hoping to find answers. And somehow, through a series of events that nobody could have planned or predicted, you ended up on the same stage, 15 feet apart, until a question about inherited traits revealed the connection you both didn't know was there." Steve turned to Amanda and Michael directly. "You two need time together, private time, to talk and to begin building whatever relationship you want to have. But before we give you that privacy, I want to ask if you'd be willing to share this moment with the world, to let us document this reunion, not for entertainment, but because there are thousands of adoptees and birth parents out there searching for each other, hoping for exactly what you just found. Your story could give them hope, could educate people about adoption and reunion, could show that these happy endings are possible." Amanda and Michael looked at each other, a wordless conversation passing between them, and then both nodded. They understood that their private miracle could become a public message of hope. Steve arranged for the families to have several hours of private time together before any cameras were involved. In a quiet room in the studio, Amanda and Michael sat across from each other and began the conversation they'd both been waiting 30 years to have. Michael spoke first, the words he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind finally being spoken aloud. "Amanda, I need to start by saying I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I wasn't strong enough or mature enough or resourced enough to keep you when you were born. I'm sorry that you grew up not knowing me, not knowing where you came from, wondering about your biological parents. I'm sorry for every moment of your life that I missed, every birthday, every milestone, every achievement that I should have been there to celebrate. The decision to place you for adoption has haunted me every single day for 30 years, and I need you to know that it wasn't because I didn't love you or didn't want you. It was because I loved you and wanted you to have a better life than I could give you at 23 with no job and no support." He continued, his voice breaking. "But that explanation doesn't erase the fact that you grew up without me, that you had questions I should have been there to answer, that you had a father-shaped hole in your story that I caused. So I'm sorry, deeply sorry, and I understand if you're angry or hurt, or if you never want a relationship with me. But I need you to know that I've loved you every single day, that I've carried this photo of you as a baby in my wallet for 30 years, that you've been part of my heart even when you couldn't be part of my life." Michael pulled out his wallet, removed the worn photograph he'd carried for 3 decades, and handed it to Amanda. She took it with shaking hands, staring at the image of a much younger Michael holding a tiny baby, the only proof that had existed of their connection. Amanda looked at the photo for a long time, tears falling onto the worn paper, processing the reality that her biological father had carried her with him all these years. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but filled with emotion. "Michael, I'm not angry. I'm not hurt in the way you might think. Yes, I've had questions my whole life. Yes, there's been an empty space where biological family should have been. But I've also understood that adoption is complicated, and that birth parents make impossible decisions in impossible situations. My mom, Karen, has always talked about you and my birth mother with respect, always told me that you must have loved me very much to want a better life for me than you could provide." She continued, "What I've always struggled with most is the wondering, the not knowing if you ever thought about me, if you regretted the adoption, if I mattered to you at all, or if you just moved on with your life and forgot about me. But hearing you say that you've thought about me every day, seeing this photo that you've carried for 30 years, learning that you've been searching for me too, that fills the empty space in a way I didn't know was possible. You didn't forget me. I mattered to you. That's what I needed to know." Amanda shared her own story, her childhood with Karen, her father who died when she was young, her decision to become a nurse partly because she'd always been drawn to helping people in crisis moments. She talked about her search for biological family, the DNA tests and registries, the hope and disappointment when nothing came of them. She shared that she'd always imagined what her biological parents might be like, what reasons they might have had for adoption, whether they'd be proud of the person she'd become. Michael listened, crying as he learned about the daughter he'd missed, the woman she'd become. He told her about his own life, his teaching career, his marriage to Susan, his son who was her half-brother, his sister Rachel who was her biological aunt. He shared medical history, family stories, photos of relatives Amanda had never known existed. They talked for hours, 30 years of separation beginning to be bridged by conversation, honesty, and the tentative beginnings of a relationship. Karen, Amanda's adoptive mother, joined them after a while, and what happened next showed the true meaning of family. Michael approached Karen with humility and gratitude. "I need to thank you. You gave my daughter the life I couldn't give her, the love and stability and opportunities that I wasn't able to provide. You raised an incredible woman, compassionate and strong and successful, and that's all because of you. I will never be able to repay you for that gift, for being the mother she needed when I couldn't be the father I wanted to be." Karen, this woman who'd raised Amanda alone after losing her husband, who'd loved her daughter fiercely and unconditionally, responded with grace. "Michael, you gave me the greatest gift of my life when you chose adoption. Amanda is my daughter in every way that matters, and nothing about you being in her life now will change that. There's room in her heart for both of us, room for her to know her biological family while still being my daughter. I've never felt threatened by her searching for you because real love isn't possessive, it's generous. I want her to have all the love and family and connection she can get." The three of them, Amanda, Michael, and Karen, embraced, a family constellation that looked different than traditional definitions, but that was built on love, respect, and mutual understanding that all of them played important roles in Amanda's life and story. When they were ready, Steve brought them back to the Family Feud stage, where cameras had been set up to document the reunion for the special episode that would air months later. The studio audience had been replaced by just the essential crew, creating an intimate setting for this profound moment. Steve sat with Amanda, Michael, and their families, facilitating a conversation that would eventually be watched by millions. He asked Amanda to describe what it felt like to discover her biological father in such an unexpected way. "It feels like a miracle," Amanda said simply. "I've been searching for years with no success, convinced I might never find my biological parents. And then randomly, through pure chance, my dad and I end up on the same game show on opposite teams, and a question about inherited noses reveals the connection we didn't know was there. If someone had written this as a movie script, I'd say it was too unrealistic, too convenient. But it happened, and I think it happened because we were both ready for it, both searching for it, both open to the possibility." Michael shared his perspective. "For 30 years, I've carried guilt and grief about giving up my daughter. I've prayed for a chance to meet her, to explain, to know that she was okay. But I never imagined it would happen like this, that the universe would literally put us on the same stage, that we'd find each other through a game show. It feels like I've been given a second chance I didn't think I deserved, and I'm so grateful." Steve asked the hard questions, the ones that needed to be addressed. "What happens now? You're strangers who are biologically father and daughter. How do you build a relationship after 30 years of no contact?" Amanda answered thoughtfully. "We take it slow. We get to know each other as people first, not rushing into some idealized father-daughter relationship that we've never had. We talk regularly, we visit, we let the relationship develop naturally based on who we actually are rather than who we imagined each other to be. And we respect that Michael is my biological father, but Karen is my mom, and both of those truths exist together without conflicting." Michael agreed. "I have no expectations or demands. Amanda is an adult with her own life, her own family, her own relationships. I'm just grateful to know her, to be part of her life in whatever capacity she's comfortable with. I'm not trying to be dad, in the traditional sense. I'm just trying to be someone she can count on, someone who loves her and wants to know her and wants to be there for whatever comes next." Steve turned to address the camera, speaking to the thousands of adoptees and birth parents who would eventually see this. "What we're witnessing here is the best possible outcome of an adoption reunion: mutual respect, grace, honesty, and the understanding that families can be complex, and that multiple people can play important roles in one person's life without competing with each other. But I also want to acknowledge that not all reunions go this well, that sometimes there's hurt and anger and disappointment, and that's valid too." He continued with important context. "Adoption is complicated. Birth parents make the decision for all kinds of reasons, sometimes selfless, sometimes necessary, sometimes traumatic. Adoptees grow up with questions, and sometimes with abandonment wounds even in the best adoptive families. Adoptive parents give incredible love while sometimes feeling insecure about biological family. All of these experiences and feelings are valid, and reunion, when it happens, doesn't magically solve everything. But it can provide answers, closure, and the possibility of new relationships if everyone approaches it with openness and grace. The episode that eventually aired, 6 months after the reunion, was a carefully crafted documentary about Amanda and Michael's story. It showed the moment of realization on the Family Feud stage, the DNA test results, the emotional reunion, and the months that followed as they built their relationship. The documentary included their first meeting outside the studio, when Michael traveled to Denver to visit Amanda and meet her extended family. It showed Amanda traveling to Portland to meet Michael's family, including her half-brother, her biological aunt, and other relatives she'd never known existed. Most movingly, it showed Amanda finally learning about her biological mother, Laura, whom Michael had tracked down with Amanda's permission. Laura, who had carried the same guilt and grief that Michael had for 30 years, was living in Florida with a family of her own. When Michael reached out to explain that he'd found Amanda, that she was healthy and happy, and wanted to meet both of her biological parents, Laura had broken down crying, barely able to believe that the daughter she'd grieved for 3 decades wanted to know her. The documentary showed the reunion between Amanda and Laura, equally emotional and profound, as Amanda finally had both pieces of her biological origin story. Laura, like Michael, had carried a photo from the hospital, had thought about her daughter every day, had wondered if she'd made the right choice and if Amanda would ever forgive her. The three of them, Amanda, Michael, and Laura, who had created a life together 30 years ago and then gone their separate ways, were now connected again through their love for the daughter they'd given up and who'd found them again. The documentary explored the complex emotions of everyone involved. Karen talked about what it was like to watch her daughter build relationships with biological parents, acknowledging moments of insecurity, but mostly feeling joy that Amanda was getting the answers and connections she'd always wanted. Michael's wife, Susan, shared her perspective on suddenly having her husband reunite with a daughter from a previous relationship, the adjustment of welcoming Amanda into their family, and the beauty of watching Michael heal from 30 years of grief and guilt. Amanda's half-brother talked about discovering he had an older sister he'd never known about, and the excitement of building a sibling relationship. The documentary included expert commentary from adoption counselors and therapists, discussing the rise in adoption reunions due to DNA testing, the complex emotions that arise, the importance of managing expectations, and the ways that healthy reunion relationships can develop when everyone approaches them with honesty, respect, and patience. 1 year after their reunion on the Family Feud stage, Steve invited Amanda, Michael, and their families back for a final update. They arrived as a blended, extended family that had grown to include both Amanda's adoptive family and her biological families. Steve asked Amanda to reflect on the year since finding her biological father. "It's been the most transformational year of my life," Amanda said. "I went from having questions about half my genetic heritage to having answers, relationships, extended family, and a sense of completeness I didn't realize I was missing. Michael has become an important person in my life, not replacing the father I lost when I was 5, but filling a different role as someone I can talk to about medical history, family traits, shared interests that make more sense now that I know where they came from." She continued, "But what's been most meaningful is the relationship between all my parents. Michael, Laura, and my mom, Karen, have all met multiple times, and they've formed their own friendship based on their shared love for me and their mutual respect for each other's roles in my life. That's given me permission to love all of them without guilt, to build relationships with my biological parents without feeling like I'm betraying my mom who raised me." Michael shared his perspective on the year. "Finding Amanda has healed something in me I didn't think could be healed. For 30 years, I carried this wound of losing my daughter, this constant ache of wondering if she was okay and if I'd ever get to know her. And now I do know her, I know she's more than okay, she's extraordinary, and I get to have a relationship with her. That's a gift I never thought I'd receive." He talked about specific moments that had been meaningful. Attending Amanda's white coat ceremony when she completed additional medical training, being introduced to her friends as her biological father, having her call him just to talk, being included in family events. "None of it erases the 30 years I missed, but it gives me the opportunity to be present for her future, and that means everything." Steve asked what message they wanted to send to other adoptees searching for biological family or birth parents hoping to reconnect with children they placed for adoption. Amanda spoke first. "If you're searching, don't give up. Use every resource available: DNA testing, registries, social media, adoption search angels. And when you do find your biological family, manage your expectations but stay open to the possibility of meaningful relationships. Not every reunion will be as positive as ours, but even difficult reunions can provide answers and closure that matter. Michael added his message. If you're a birth parent living with guilt and grief about the child you placed for adoption, I want you to know that you're not alone, that your feelings are valid, and that it's never too late to make yourself available if your child searches for you. Register with reunion registries, do DNA testing, make it possible for your child to find you if they. And if reunion does happen, be honest about your reasons for the adoption, apologize for the pain of separation even if adoption was the right choice, and let the relationship develop based on who your child actually is, not who you imagine them to be. Steve shared his own reflections on witnessing this reunion. This experience changed me. I've seen a lot in my career, but watching two people who didn't know each other existed discover they were father and daughter. Watching them build a relationship from scratch based on biology and love and mutual respect. Watching them navigate the complexity of blended families and multiple parents with such grace. It reminded me that family is both simpler and more complicated than we sometimes think. It's simpler because at its core, it's just about love and connection. But it's complicated because those connections can exist in multiple forms with multiple people. And that's not a problem to solve, it's a richness to celebrate. The documentary concluded with a powerful scene of Amanda's birthday celebration. Her first birthday celebrated with both her adoptive family and her biological families present. The gathering included Karen, Michael and Susan, Laura and her family, Amanda's half-siblings from multiple families, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and Steve Harvey himself, who had become part of Amanda's extended family through this experience. Amanda gave a toast that captured the essence of what she'd learned. A year ago, I walked onto a game show stage looking for fun and maybe some prize money. Instead, I found the piece of my story I'd been searching for my entire life. I found my biological father, and through him, I found my biological mother, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, a whole extended family I never knew existed. But more than that, I learned that family isn't defined by biology alone or by who raises you alone. It's defined by love, by showing up, by choosing each other every day. She continued, tears in her eyes. My mom, Karen, is my mom because she chose me, raised me, loved me through every stage of my life. Michael and Laura are my biological parents because they created me, and because they've chosen to be in my life now even though they couldn't when I was born. All of these relationships are real, all of them matter, and all of them make me who I am. I'm not divided between families, I'm multiplied by them. Before we close this beautiful story, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because stories like Amanda and Michael's remind us that it's never too late for reunion, that love can survive decades of separation, and that families come in many forms, all of them valid when they're built on respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Comment below if you've experienced adoption, reunion, or the complexity of blended families. And remember that if you're searching for biological family, or if you're a birth parent hoping to be found, don't give up hope, because the story you're living might have a chapter of reunion waiting to be written. Michael Bennett and Amanda Peterson walked onto a Family Feud stage as strangers, randomly selected to compete against each other, having no idea that they were biologically father and daughter separated by 30 years and a closed adoption. A question about inherited traits revealed what DNA and destiny had brought together, and what followed was a reunion that proved some connections transcend time, distance, and even knowledge of each other's existence. They lost 30 years, and that loss is real and painful and can never be fully recovered. But they found each other when they were both ready, both searching, both open to the possibility of relationship. And from that found connection, they've built something beautiful, a father-daughter relationship that exists alongside Amanda's relationship with the mother who raised her, proving that love multiplies rather than divides, that there's room in the human heart for multiple parents playing different roles, and that family, in all its complex configurations, is ultimately about choosing each other and showing up with love. Michael carried a photo of his infant daughter for 30 years, a reminder of the child he'd loved and lost. Now he has new photos of Amanda as an adult of them together finally, of a relationship that shouldn't have been possible, but that exists because the universe conspired to put them in the same place at the same time, to give them the reunion they'd both been praying for, to prove that sometimes, against all odds, lost family finds its way home.